Hello listeners, we are your co-hosts Janine Bailey and Marie Quigley for the Empower World Coaching and Leadership Podcast. Empower World brings guests who are making a difference to the world to inspire coaches and leaders who lead with mind, heart and soul.
Hello and welcome to Empower World, the Coaching and Leadership Podcast. My name is Marie Quigley and I'm delighted to be here with you this morning to talk to the wonderful Alex Swallow, who is a coach and he helps high achievers to grow their influence so that they can have a bigger impact on the world. So important to do. And he's also the author of How to Become an Influencer, published in October 2016. Not only that, but he's also a digital nomad. He's been living and working in many countries over the years, and he's a social entrepreneur. He founded his own charitable organization and has been a chief executive and chair in the charity sector. And in addition to that, you can see he does a lot of things. He volunteers at the Sheffield Coaching Exchange, of which I'm also a supporter and a member. And he's one of the presenters on the Coach's Journey podcast. So as well as all of that, he's also an all-round wonderful human being and someone I am absolutely delighted to call my friend. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Marie. I'm sure you already know this, but of all the lovely description the very generous description you just gave of my life and career, the fact that you call me your friend is the thing that means the most to me. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, we've developed that friendship over the past couple of years, really because of that wonderful Sheffield coaching community that we're both part of, Alex. And I remember the first time we met and connected, there was a deep respect for what you do and also so much fun and connection that we regularly meet up to catch up and have coffees and things like that. So yeah, I'm very glad to know you.
The same, Marie. I remember, and it's nice to describe for the audience, that the first time I remember meeting you was it was at someone else's presentation, and at that point, I think you were the first MCC level coach that I've ever met. It was if some grand high wizard was in the room, and but despite that, you were just so generous and humble and present and willing to share yourself, but not showing off. And I just thought, this is somebody I would like to get to know. And I remember feeling inspired after having met you. So the fact we're here today is wonderful to me.
Gosh, that's so kind of you to mention that. These titles that we're given, of course, we work hard for them and there's lots of practice put into them. And as part of our profession, I think it's important to keep up our CDP. But I also recognize that we weren't born as a coach, and so we all come with so much interesting and valuable experience to the world that we must never forget that. So I might be MCC, but that doesn't mean I don't have other experiences that other people do, and I believe we learn from everybody no matter what we're doing in life. So thank you for acknowledging that. Go ahead, Alex. I interrupted.
No, I was just going to say that I think that's also, I think, in the spirit of our local meetup, the Sheffield Coaching Exchange, is that there really are people with a range of specialisms in different areas. And there are some people who have been coaches for much longer or have more qualifications, but other people have relevant experience in other areas. And so I think that sort of arena of mutual support and friendship, I was really lucky to find the community. And I always feel a bit sorry for people who are in other parts of the UK and don't have that sort of meetup, or in other countries. I just think it's randomly lucky I've ended up in Sheffield and I happen to have that community.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for me as a coach. So I returned here mid-COVID in 2020, and I did not know this community existed. And finding a place when you are an entrepreneur or a solopreneur or an independent person working on your own, finding a place where you can connect with like-minded people, particularly in person, because we're doing so much work online, is so valuable for me in the work I do. And that's why I am very much supportive of the in-person meetups, and you and the team created a Gather and Grow last summer for the expansion of the sharing of the information. And that was really very important, I think, to keep this growth going for all of us. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. No, it's wonderful to be part of.
Yeah. And you've just come back from an exciting trip, which is maybe where we should begin, Alex, in our conversation. I'd love to hear about that experience.
Thank you. Yeah. So, as you mentioned in your introduction, I'm a digital nomad. So, many people will be familiar with the phrase or location independence, and it essentially means that you can work and travel at the same time. So different people do it in all sorts of different ways. Some people are in a place just for a week and move on. For me and my wife, we're typically in a place for at least a month, might be 4 or 5 months. And I've just come back from Kenya and Tanzania, and it was a very special trip because the generation before my wife and her family grew up in Kenya. So we got to see actually where they grew up, which was incredibly important and special for me. But the reason why I think it might be relevant, particularly to your audience, is because firstly, I want to make people aware, if they're not, of this idea of being a digital nomad and encourage people around that. But secondly, and it's something we've talked about before, which is about it's really important to find a way to sort of have that headspace as a coach and as a solo entrepreneur, to think about what's important to you in the world, what you want to achieve. And I find being a digital nomad is one of the things that helps me to be reminded of that for myself.
Yeah. For me, who's also done a lot of traveling, Alex, and brought my work along and set up my business so that I can move around the world and do the work I love. It's so important for me to have that flexibility of mindset, to be able to think outside the box onto how I want to create my life that's aligned with my work, that's aligned with my kids and my husband and my family, and being able to travel and return to places is so important. So, and I think as we're developing as coaches who run our own businesses, it is something it's useful to think about, because nothing is set in stone in my mind. We can change anything at any given time, and that ability to be a digital nomad really is inviting in so many ways.
Absolutely. And I'd say the other thing is that there are some people who are digital nomads who constantly travel, and they're essentially full-time digital nomads. But the way my wife and I do it is that we've got a lovely base in Sheffield. We absolutely love Sheffield. And because we've lived in different places, we can see how special Sheffield is and how lucky people like yourself were to be born in this wonderful city of Sheffield. It really is incredible. But what it means is for us is we can have that base where we can have some familiar things and some home comforts and see people who are important to us. And then we can go away and have some adventures, and we're gradually seeing the bits of the world that we're really excited about. And I mention that partly because I feel that, and it might be a bit of a theme of our conversation, but I think often when people are thinking of something like being a digital nomad, they think of entirely giving up the life that they had. But what me and you are really talking about here is fitting it around, moving stuff, maybe doing a bit of work here and a bit of work there. And that, I suggest, might be more approachable to a wider amount of people.
Yeah. And so for you, when you and your wife decided this was going to be the way you were going to live your life for now, because who knows, that might change down the line.
Yeah.
What were you thinking about? What were the values that you were honoring by choosing to do this in this way?
It's a beautiful question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me the question quite like that. So firstly, thank you for the gift of that question. That's really meaningful to me. I think for me, a lot of it was just that before I met my wife, both of us had traveled quite a bit. My wife had had a job which took her to different countries. She'd been on a major all-round the world trip and seen loads and loads of places. I'd been an assistant language teacher for 2 years in Japan, and I helped to run a voluntary teaching scheme in Romania for several months. So we both had a taste of that. At the time that I met my wife, I felt that I had previously had quite an identity as a traveller, which when I was busy with work in London had slightly been eroded. And I think our thing is that we just wanted to create some memories together. And I think for me, my feeling is always that you never know how long life is going to be. You never know how long the life is that you're going to have. And I don't want to wait until I'm retired, for example, to experience those things with my wife. And the other value, I suppose, for me is that I'm not a sort of an anti-materialistic person in any way, but I'm the sort of person who we don't have a car. I can't even drive. My wife can drive. I don't have a big television. I don't have lots of material things. I collect experiences rather than material things. And it's not, as I say, I'm not looking down on people who like material things at all. I just think for me, memories seem to be just the gift that keeps on giving. Looking back at photos, thinking things we've experienced, that we've been married 10 years now. And the things that we've packed into that time feels like a lot to me. And that's a really important value for me to create those memories.
Yeah, and you said that word memories a number of times in that conversation. So what is the value that's honouring when you think about that?
Well, firstly, I think for me, like one of the driving forces in my life is that I always think that, I think it was actually in a Monty Python song, but how extraordinarily unlikely it is that each one of us is born. That's my strong sense. I've also, at least as far back I can remember, had a strong sense of gratitude for the life I've been given, to have lovely parents, a lovely family, to be born in the country I was born in. I feel very grateful. And so for me, because I have that feeling of gratitude and that it wasn't likely that these things were going to happen, a major value for me is to live my life according to my own choices as much as possible and not according to the choices of the predominant society around me, say. And that doesn't mean I'm always like a maverick, and it doesn't mean I don't care what other people think, but it means that when push comes to shove, I can look back and think I took decisions that were in line with who I am, and travel and spending a lot of time with my wife are in line with who I am. And that's why it's so important to me.
Well, gosh, that sounds so beautiful. And knowing that, how important is knowing that so you can then choose to live a life on purpose. So I'm hearing that connection to others, that freedom, that experimentation, that being willing to stretch outside of your comfort zone. So many things that sound very important to how you're choosing to live your life. And then how you're choosing to live your life is fitting the work around that so that it's all aligned. That's what I'm hearing, Alex. Maybe I'm missing something here.
No, that's a beautiful summation, because I was just looking over, I have my values written above my desk, and they are: humans are brilliant. I believe in the power of humanity. I think people hate on humans a bit too much. Curiosity is one of my really important values, which is definitely satisfied somewhat by travel. And my third one is, I think life is better when you choose. And I definitely, of course, think that not everybody has the same choice as I do for all sorts of reasons. So a simple one is, if you have a British passport, that unlocks a lot of doors. Not everybody has a passport that allows you to do those same things. Having enough money to travel, having enough health to travel, these are all things I'm very, very grateful for. But I think there's something in there, particularly about that, the choice, and particularly about reassessing what is it that I want to do at this moment in my life. So as you said, it might be that in a few years plans have changed, you're not a digital nomad, settled in Sheffield, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I actually find that the travel allows me to re-examine what's important to me. Partly just because I see different ways that a wider range of people, how they live their lives, and it suggests alternatives in the way I could live mine.
Yeah. And so we can see and hear that you're aligning your life with your values. And how does what you want to create with the different work that you do, how does that fit in with that, Alex?
I think a lot of it for me is that I think it's really important to, obviously as much as possible, to find work which has purpose and meaning for you. And going back to the gratitude piece, I think it absolutely incredible that, the fact we're having this conversation today on technology that wasn't around all that long ago. and the fact it's possible to actually work online. So, taking away the fact that I've got a lucky passport or I've had some lucky things happen to me in my life, the luck of being born at this particular moment in time, in the past, people could have had some of these aspirations and not been able to do it. So to give an example, which I know is very important in your own work, is that you can work with clients when you travel in a third country that isn't in the country that you're actually in because you're working online. So whereas in the past, people might have worked abroad, they wouldn't have been able to go to another place and they'll work with somebody from a third place. And I think something about that is very, very special. So when I look at what's important to me, I like to find work that affords me the opportunity to travel if I want to. And a lot of it is the if I want to. It's having the freedom to do it if I want. It doesn't mean I have to travel all the time.
Mm. So I'm hear you making decisions that are aligned with these values you've talked about, but also looking for purposeful work that's going to give you that sense of fulfillment that sounds so important to you. And also, perhaps, I'm getting practical here, but put food on the table so that you can continue to do this work, because that is important, isn't it?
Hugely. And also, I don't want to give your listeners and your viewers the impression that, these things are always easy. So, for example, you could be working with a client, but their timings, they might be in a time zone that is a little bit difficult for you. And sometimes, you could, as a digital nomad, those can be real problems. Another problem might be something like on the travel, sometimes we've had power cuts. Sometimes we haven't had the internet work for a very long time. I remember we lived in Berlin, one of my absolute favorite cities, one of our absolute favorite cities. And I remember every week I was recording something live. And I remember standing huddled by the lift with my phone so that I could record this. And there's lots of things like that could potentially get in the way or trip you up or put some people off. But I think it's that value of thinking, I'm going to try to do this thing. And then if I need to, for example, take work that puts food on the table and I couldn't do that while I was traveling, absolutely. Like, I think it's not something that's going to be a hard and fast rule all the time. For me, the importance is the thinking about it. I think that as human beings, the ability we have to actually imagine the life that we could create is so beautiful. We can choose not to do that, but never imagining it in the first place feels sad for me and a bit of a wasted opportunity.
Mm. It's so interesting, isn't it? You've heard me say before that I think fulfillment is a radical act because we're making brave decisions and being at choice as to what we do and don't do. So when we want something, yet we know it's going to perhaps be difficult or maybe upset people in our lives who want us to kind of remain and not move into that space that they perhaps don't understand. How do you practice taking care of self during that time, Alex, and giving yourself, I think you used the word before we joined the conversation about creating some headspace for yourself. How do you do that?
I think one of the most important things you can do is, as much as possible, to surround yourself with people who support and champion you and want the best for you. So in my case, for example, the fact that not only that my wife can also live this life and do these things, but that she's so incredibly supportive of my dreams and aspirations is an amazing tonic and something that really, really helps me. But it might not be a significant other. It could be your friends, it could be your family, it could be the society in which you live. Like we're talking about the Sheffield Coaching Exchange, for example. Those things make a real difference. But I would say on the self-care side is that from the outside, I'm sure to some people, I live my life in absolutely the way that I want to. But underneath, I still, like anybody, am a member of a society that holds certain values. I don't, I'm not entirely separated from those things. So while I've always hopefully done things my own way, I can still have guilt and concern and worry about the way in which I'm living my life or I'm doing things. Luckily, due to the supportive environment I was brought up in and the people around me, I've never really felt that from the people who are significant to me. But I think from a self-care side, a lot of it is around taking the time to find the things that matter to you, that ground you. And for me, no pun intended with the grounding, it's sitting with a nice cup of coffee is a really, really important thing. So when I think of the different countries in which I've drunk coffee and the different places in which I've drunk coffee, on this trip, we went to a coffee plantation for the first time, which was absolutely extraordinary. There's something about that simple thing of sitting, watching the world go by and having a cup of coffee that is somehow familiar, no matter which country I'm having it in, or indeed whether I'm having it at home, as I did this morning.
Yeah, how lovely. So what I'm hearing is having rituals and processes that keep you, in your words, grounded and connected to self and all of those things back home, but maybe in a new environment that just allows you to be fully you.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, Marie, is there something that is similar for you? I know you've lived in many countries and moved back to Sheffield. Is there something like that of a similar tone for you?
Yeah, I think, I have a practice of mindfulness as well, Alex. Now, I go on and off it. I'm not perfect in any way, but remembering my heritage, remembering my ancestors, remembering what they went through to allow me to be fully free in the work that I do, that's a really grounding experience. And also knowing my ancestors left their homeland all those years ago and made new lives in different locations, but still remained true to their values of what mattered most, is something that stays with me as I move around. I want to be who I am, but I also want to explore and learn about different cultures so that I can expand my own awareness. That's really important to me.
And that was really helpful, and it made me think of something else, which is might be useful for the listeners, which is around when you're going through a period of growth. Even if you do have people who are supportive and who care about you and who want you to do well, you can take steps which might feel like a rejection of where it was you've come from, even if it either isn't meant like that or isn't intentional, or you actually really like where you come from. So I can give a practical example myself. So, my parents growing up were fantastically supportive of my education, but my parents didn't have a chance to go to university, and I went to Cambridge University, which is a very particular type of university. And so I would sometimes find when I was there that I had to sort of negotiate the balance between loving where I came from, loving where I was, somehow understanding where I was slightly temporary, as in it was this liminal space where I wasn't necessarily going to be in that space when I left the university, but was incredibly privileged while I was there. And sometimes those things were very, very difficult for me. So I'll give an example. I don't think I've probably shared this publicly before, but I remember when I was I feel myself getting a bit emotional as I'm telling it, but when I was at university, I remember my parents gave me some money, so I could buy food while I was there, and sometimes I ate in the college, and sometimes I bought something out. And I remember the first time that I bought a sandwich out, I felt incredibly guilty about it, and which might sound weird, but my parents are the sort of people who'd always make their own sandwiches. They'll spend money on the right things, but I'm not used to my parents, or wasn't used to my parents then, buying a sandwich out. And I can remember, I think I might even have cried. I certainly was hugely emotional in that situation. And it wasn't because my family wouldn't have wanted me to buy a sandwich, didn't want me to have good food, anything like that. It was just there was a gap between what I was used to and what I was doing, that nobody minded me leaping across that gap. But as small a thing as buying a sandwich rather than making it, and I think loads of people have that sort of experience at university and in other parts of their life, that was hugely emotional for me, and I can still remember that experience.
Yeah. I mean, I feel touched as you talk about it, Alex, because I know it reminds me of things that I've done that my parents would never have done or my grandparents would never, because of because of the life they lived and the experiences my life opened up to. Um, and so how do you move from the guilt of doing this new thing for you that maybe seems extravagant, maybe seems out of the ordinary? Because I'm guessing as we move, I'm thinking about our listeners, Alex, as they move into this world of coaching and are being entrepreneurs and setting up a business and maybe moving like you did from the charity sector into working for themselves and asking for money, which is always a real challenge for people who are helpers. How did you manage that emotional guilt that you experienced? What allowed you to continue in that world and move forward with that?
Firstly, I'd say it's still a process. In terms of the asking for money, I still feel I could get a lot better at it. And I've been, a solopreneur for quite a while now. So I would say there's a kind of, for many people, especially the asking for money thing, even if it gets easier, there's a certain process. I don't know if it's a bit of a British thing as well. There's certain cultural things that make that slightly difficult and around money for many, many people. So I would say, firstly, it's really important to be gentle with yourself about it. And actually, if you just go and research, so many people find these things hard. A lot of it is practice. A lot of it is surrounding yourself again with supportive people. And a lot of it is realizing that other people have these same concerns. But one of the things that I think one of the biggest things that has really helped me is when I look back at my life, I wouldn't say I have any major regret of anything that I've decided to do. Because in most cases, I have decided to do that thing. So rather than I've just let it happen to me. And it doesn't mean that I'm always dynamic and I always make decisions quickly. But once I make a decision, I can be quite sort of final about that. If I get myself in the right headspace, I can then make decisions quite quickly. And I think for me, seeing choice as a value in itself has been hugely helpful to me, because what it means is even if I made a choice that was bad, it's still a value for me to make that choice rather than just let life happen to me. And so that's consoled me a lot. But I think I've had the ability, the means or whatever to make those choices for myself.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Alex. Guilt is an interesting emotion. So I think it's Brené Brown that talks about the difference between shame and guilt. And shame kind of shuts us down and stops us from growing. Whereas guilt can be an emotion that we recognize something, but we can do something different about it. Perhaps I'm not describing it as beautiful.
No, that's good.
But how do guilt can come in many formats as we're doing this work. How did you particularly move through stages of guilt to allow yourself maybe to move from just buying a sandwich to moving into a restaurant, buying a meal, and the different stages of growth that happens?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a big question. Yeah, I love the thing about moving from a sandwich to buying a meal, because I love food and drink. So I certainly have no problem with buying things now if I want to. But I still want to get good value from it. I can't just spend the money and not think about it. That's important. I would say two things spring to mind very readily as being important. The first one is I find as I've got older, there have sadly just been experiences in my life where somebody has passed away very young, for example, or somebody has had some misfortune happen to them which they couldn't have foreseen and is absolutely nothing to do with choices they made or anything they did or anything like that. So I can give an example. I have a cousin who passed away last year, who's a few years younger than me. Now, when I think of him and his zest for life, I kind of think that in the grand scheme of the cosmos, me making decisions about things that are an active choice, hopefully in line with my values, because I've taken time to think about those, and also which um, I feel will add something to my life or important to my life. Um, I feel that I should take those decisions for all those people who haven't had the opportunities that I have. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that I find that I try to remind myself of where I'm from. I try to ground myself in that experience. So that is all sorts of things. Like I can remember in the past choosing to live in quite a working class area because my background's pretty working class. Like so, when I was in London, I can remember literally picking, I'm going to live in this area of the East End of London. That was, a bit more like what I was familiar with. Or another one which I particularly enjoy is that I'm a member of the Wine Society, which is this old British institution. Anyone can be a member. You don't have to pass a test or something. I remember going to a wine tasting at their AGM in London, having all these incredible wines, I think for free, and then afterwards going to McDonald's because it grounded me, because I also like McDonald's. So I'd have these incredible wines most people would never get to try, and then I went to McDonald's. And for me, that was really, really important because it made me think that I'm not just on a particular path, not remembering where I'm from, what's important to me. And I genuinely like a range of different experiences in different ways.
I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm sure that was
Thank you.
very difficult. And these moments in our life that happen to us or are outside of our control, let's say, can be real wake-up calls for us. And I mean, I've had a number of huge, lovely wake-up calls, breakthroughs, breakdowns, whatever you want to call them, in my own life that has allowed me to be braver in my decision-making and still remember who I am, but also kind of reach for the stars a little bit, because life is short and we can, if we think about our potential, what my perspective is, why keep it hidden under a bushel when actually perhaps we are on this earth for a purpose, and let's make the most of ourselves.
Yeah, completely. And I think, you can expand that thing to, it can be about people who have been significant for us who've passed away, but it can also, and again, going back to the travel side of things, you only have to travel a little bit. You only have to travel around your own city, and you can see people who have had bad things happen to them, again, through no fault of their own. That could be us very, very easily. And so, again, you think, well, if I have a lucky life, and I think I've had a genuinely lucky life, but I define lucky life here as, roof over your head, enough food in your belly, at least one person who cares about you. Then I think even from that, you think what somebody in some difficult situation might do with the opportunity that you've got. And I think the difficulty is that the sort of overwhelming responsibility of that can trip you into guilt and inaction. So I don't think it's a simple thing that, say, you go to another country and you see people living in poverty, or in this country, but sometimes other levels in other countries, and that just flips a switch, and you're like, okay, I'm going to fulfill my potential. I think it's an ongoing dialogue. It's an ongoing dialogue with yourself about what you want to do and how you want to show up in the world.
Yeah, I agree, Alex. And I think if we think about our lives up to now, there have been opportunities and there have been horrible things maybe that have happened to each and every single one of us. And it's not about comparing ourselves to other people's lives. It's just recognizing that that's been our journey. And if we can look at those defining moments in our life, be they joyful or be they challenging, we can learn about ourselves so much and bring all the traits and values and practicalities and behaviors into our lives that we've learned from those defining moments, which allows us then to choose to live a more purposeful life.
Yeah, hugely. And I love you making the point about comparison, because there's there's all sorts of comparison that we can make. And here I'm not just talking as human beings, I'm talking as solopreneurs, I'm talking about your audience who are established coaches or are coming to coaching. It's very easy to compare ourselves, and most people will compare themselves negatively. The comparison isn't normally, look at all these other people, that's great, I'm better than them. It's normally, I don't like the way I am in comparison, I haven't done so well. But also, it's not a comparison in terms of, who's had the worst life, or if, worse things have happened to somebody else and all sorts of terrible things have happened to people, that doesn't mean that I can't be affected by the things that have happened to me, however big or small they'd be to someone else. I mean, it's really, as well, I think that when we doing that comparison and we see that everybody has difficult points in their lives, it should serve to unite us more as humanity, because what it's really about, going back to what you said about, the MCC, and I'm thinking of the grand wizard of coaching or what have you, it's that, one of the things that I so value about you is you show up to me as your whole self. Like I've seen you in a variety of, situations now, and it's nice to say to your listeners, I've regularly listened to this podcast. Before I was host of a podcast myself. I've been on your training. You've spoken at events for Sheffield Coaching Exchange. We've met up one-to-one. We've been for lunch together. In all those things, you've shown up as yourself. And I think that if the things that we're learning about ourselves and the world and the good things we have and the bad things we have enable us in some subtle way to show up a bit more as ourselves, whatever that means to us, then I think that's a really wonderful thing to happen over time.
Yeah, thank you for those very kind words, Alex. And I feel the same about you. And I think, if I'm thinking about our coaches who might be wanting to show themselves to the world, and how do they, often a lot of questions come in. How do I turn up authentically? How do I get my voice across? How do I show people who I am when I might be only on a screen, or I might be only commenting on platforms such as LinkedIn or other social media? So as somebody who recognizes the power of influence, what would you say to people who are thinking about sharing themselves with the rest of the world? What's important to consider?
Yeah, I'd say two things that will hopefully set their minds slightly at ease. One is to say that most people will worry about how they show up. So, there are some people, you're mentioning Brene Brown earlier. I'm not saying Brene Brown doesn't have doubts, but the way that she shows up suggests to me that she's spent a lot of time thinking about how she wants to show up, and she embodies that. At least that's how I experience it. But I think that the first thing is to say is we're all in this together. Like, we all have things that we're scared of. We all have moments that will make us doubt ourselves. So I can give you an example before this call. I'm very confident on the stage. I'm very confident networking. I love talking to people. What scares me is technology going wrong. Not because I'm a technophobe, but people who are watching the video will see that I've only got one headphone in. It's because I lost my other headphones on the plane, or they might turn up somewhere. And for some reason, this ear canal seems slightly funny shaped. So this one keeps falling off. I mean, this one falls out a bit, but this one always falls out, right? So somebody could listen to me and think that I was confident, and I am in certain settings, but I will still have my own things to struggle with and deal with. So that's the first thing that I think should hopefully make people be a bit more gentle with themselves and feel a bit better. The second one is, and we've spoken about this, me and you have spoken about this before, is that I think people hold themselves to this very high ideal when it comes to influence, which is that people see an influencer, maybe like a celebrity or someone at the top of the profession which they themselves are working in, and think that they need to be like that. But actually, what I always try to teach people from my work with influence is that the more important thing is first to look at what is the impact that you want to have on the world, and then how much influence do you actually need for that. So if I want to really have an impact on my local community, it makes no sense to me to try to get a national stage for my ideas. because it's actually the local community that I need to speak to. They're my audience. So people really evaluating what matters to them in terms of impact before they even think of influence, I think will also make them feel a little bit happier.
So look at what you want to create. Look at what's important to you first, and then take it step by step from that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it really helps for people to think, when they start to think in that way, it's also possible perhaps to realize that it's not about that everybody's going to hear your message. Because, when people talk about niching and when people talk about your ideal client and what have you, for me, what they're really talking about is that you can't, if you try to be all things to all people, it's not going to work, especially as a solopreneur in a small team. Some people are going to hear your message and some people aren't going to hear your message. So if you think about what impact you want to have, unless you're incredibly ambitious, for which I praise people for, but unless you're incredibly ambitious, it's not going to be everybody. And if it's not going to be everybody, then maybe you don't need to worry about every platform. So, for example, when I speak to people about influence, people might say to me, oh, I don't really like LinkedIn, or I don't really like personal branding, or I don't like writing, for example. So I don't want to write things for websites. And I say, that doesn't matter, because it still leaves so many things you can do. It might be that it would serve the person to get over their fear of writing because they actually are a great writer, but somebody said something mean to them once and they need to get over that. But it might just be they don't like writing and they're an adult and they get to decide those things. And if that's the case, how can you build your life and your business to do more of the things that you like and you're effective at, to get to the people that you want to serve? And then it becomes a game of finding more effective ways to do that rather than having to get your message to everybody all of the time.
Right. And one of the things I hear new coaches in particular saying is, the market's flooded. My voice cannot be heard. So if they're looking to influence in a smaller arena, let's say, and they're doing things that they feel confident at, or maybe, Alex, they don't even know whether they're confident at because it's so new to them that they're moving in a space that feels a little bit scary. I mean, I heard a story the other day about one coach who has spent so much money signing up to programs that promise a 6-figure income, and she signed up to numerous ones of them because she feels totally inadequate with the promoting side of herself. So what do you say to someone like that who's coming in to that space?
Yeah, I would say firstly that, and this goes back to the point I was making about luck and about opportunity. Firstly, I would say that while, and I don't know the statistics, there are many, many women, for example, in the coaching sector, I don't think, for example, that it's the same ease of playing field for absolutely everybody all the time. So I think firstly, there's going to be certain barriers in people's way, which are real and which are difficult. And sometimes, myself and others have spoken about how sometimes, the best coaches I've met are women. Some of the sort of most prominent people in the coaching sector can sometimes be men. So you nodding your head. I'm sure we have shared feelings on that. So the first thing to say is not to dismiss the things that are hard, but hopefully to be gentle with yourself about it. Because I think if you get into that dialogue of your head where you sort of say, oh, it shouldn't be hard, and it shouldn't be hard because this person thinks I can get 6 figures in a week or something. Whereas actually, if you recognize that everybody finds these things hard, at least at first, that they take time. And one thing to say is that, and I think it's a good piece of advice, it's that many people, when they first start coaching, won't be full-time coaches. So, for example, I do coaching, but also consulting, and also, I do a variety of things. Many, many people will do that. So I think if you can not put all your eggs in one basket with coaching, at least at the start, that might be an option for some people. But the other thing I'd say is just that when you're putting yourself out there, it's scary, but the more that you can do it in a way which is genuinely authentic and is more about the way in which perhaps you'd like somebody to approach you. So let's suppose, for example, if you're a coach and you're finding it hard to find clients and a bit scary, there will be some clients out there who find it scary to find a coach. There are some clients out there who don't think they deserve a coach, or they think it's a sign of weakness, or they'll see a coach with all these credentials and think, well, that person might not want to work with them. If you can feel those emotions of what's happening on your side, it will make you more empathetic to, more understanding of, and better able to reach the people on the other side of that experience that you're actually trying to get to.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many images flashing through my mind as you're talking, Alex. Now, sometimes I'll say to new coaches when they're thinking about niching, which I haven't niched over the years. I kind of got lost in it when I first became a coach, and then luckily, when I became a coach, there wasn't so much presence of social media, etc. But I will say to coaches, sometimes your clients are yourself. So if you think about what it's like as you transition and move into what it is you're wanting, your clients are the same as you. They've got all of the same fears. It's the things that keep them awake at night, that keep you awake at night. Talk about that. Educate. Let people know what it's been like for you on the journey. And that will resonate with so many people who are your people. Because the people who want to work with you, Alex, and the people who want to work with me are two different kinds of people, perhaps. And they will find us through the language we use, through the way we communicate, through how we turn up at an event as ourselves, that will kind of mirror and in some cases be very different to who they are. So it's not about matching and mirroring, but there's some commonalities that somebody sees in you that you're speaking to. Am I making sense here when I say that, Alex?
You completely are. And also it really ties in well to what we were saying about the digital nomads or the travel, because actually, to see it the other way around, of course, a person doesn't have to travel at all, but they can still have clients from all over the world. And so when people think of a market being saturated, firstly, there's all sorts of ways in which that could be challenged. But the first one is, well, which market? Because how confident would somebody be that if they went to, I'll pick a country off the top of my head, Vietnam. If they went to Vietnam, which I've never been to but would very much like to, is the market for coaches saturated there? And if it isn't, couldn't someone be a coach to people in Vietnam? Because there must be shared experiences of if there's an entrepreneur they wanted to work with or something like that. So actually the idea that the market is saturated when, the population of the world is growing, even if it was from that perspective, I think just doesn't add up. It is entirely possible that in certain parts of the market might be more saturated than others, but there'll still be opportunities. But I think people need to think as laterally as possible, to realize that there will be people out there who, if they heard of this person and they really connected to them on a human-to-human basis, they would want to work with them. And, that's one of the sad things for me about our sector, is that quite often I think you'll have some people who are great coaches. You'll have some people who are great at marketing what they do and finding clients. At certain points, like with you, there'll be somebody who embodies both of those things. But in many cases, that might be two different groups of people, and good people will leave the industry because they don't get enough clients.
Yeah. And I think, yes, there may be areas of coaching that might feel saturated because we're in an environment where we're surrounded only by hearing about what coaches are doing. But actually, there's only one of you. There's only one of you that speaks like you, that sounds like you, that connects to people like you. And if you can turn up more and more as yourself instead of being a cooker cutty of other people, then I think for me anyway, my message comes across clearer when I'm speaking like Marie rather than somebody else. I think I learnt that early on, that was so important.
Yeah, and it also goes back to when you mentioned self-care earlier. There's all sorts of self-care. There's self-care about just having a rest, of doing things you enjoy, of having things that ground you. But an important part of self-care as coaches or as entrepreneurs or solopreneurs is really making sure that you're doing the work on yourself. So many coaches don't realize that other coaches have coaches. And when you join the profession, people might not realize that. And not just coaches, not only having coaches, but the things you read, listening to podcasts, being part of a supportive community of other coaches. I mean, one of the things about the Sheffield Coaching Exchange, which is so lovely for me, is that apart from the people are so kind and welcoming, just that we all have the same problems and the same issues. Like in our WhatsApp group, for example, somebody will say, "Oh, I'm redesigning my website," and even if I'm not redesigning my website at the time and I want to soon, I think, okay, there's someone else struggling with something that I am. Or someone will say, "I'm not so confident about this aspect of what I'm doing." And just realizing that there are other people out there in a slightly similar boat to you is hugely empowering. Otherwise, especially if we work online, we might mainly be working all day on our own and not realize that.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with that. I think as independent providers, if we stay only on our own and avoid other communities, we aren't doing ourselves service. So being part of a community really fulfills some of my values, but also sharing the knowledge of the group helps me normalize my situations. And everybody can contribute to the group. And that's the wonderful thing. There's no, well, from my perspective, it's a learning opportunity. And I do believe what you said, that the personal development of the coach is just as important as the coach training or coach experience that you have. There's a saying that we talk about is you can't take your clients in coaching to where you haven't been yourself. So if you haven't done the self-care, the paying attention to your own emotions, understanding your patterns of behavior, how on earth can you support others to do that if you haven't experienced it? That's the thing about empathy. We might not have to have the same experience as someone else, but we have to have experienced our own world so that we can tap into an understanding of what it might be like for somebody who's going through some challenges. So, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say I was laughing slightly because you said about the coach training, and then you said about the sort of personal development and growth, and at its worst those can be two different things. But I was laughing because I've done some of your training and I was thinking how much they were one and the same thing. As when I was at your training, I was learning about coaching and how to be a better coach, but I was certainly doing a lot of work on myself. And so actually, the best types of coach training, I think, are where you'll do both and where you'll be on that journey of understanding that will be the same as hopefully you'll take the client through when they're working with you. And that could be the whole process of them hearing about you for the first time, you having an introductory conversation, a coaching package, what have you. But on your training, I felt a huge amount of personal development. At the end of each day, I thought, wow, so much has happened.
Yeah, that's the way we love to train. That's the way we love to supervise. That's the way we choose to mentor, because it's a philosophy we have. I know myself, when I first began to become a coach, I did it for me. I did it for my own development. And then as I'm growing myself, I can become a much better coach because I have a deeper connection to myself, which allows me to encourage those who want to have a deeper connection to themselves. I can ask braver questions. I can put myself out there in a way that's different that differentiates me to somebody else. Thanks for making that point, Alex. The time is flying, Alex. We've been chatting for about just over an hour now, so we're going to start to come to a conclusion. I wish we could talk all day about this. And we're lucky to have you as one of our mentors on Empower World's business mentoring program that's going to be happening on Friday. We're really excited about that. You've done one round with our coaches before, and you really, the feedback was that you really made a huge influence, funnily enough, on how they viewed influencing and their presence in the world as they're growing their business. So for those who aren't able to join us on Friday, but would like some of your wisdom, what are some things you might leave our listeners to think about in terms of influencing?
The biggest thing I'd like people to take away, and I think it's been a thread that's run throughout our discussion, is that really when you're thinking about influencing, a lot of the influencing work is actually on yourself. So when people think about influence, they often think, because they think of influencers, they think of things on social media, and they think of these, big out there in the world things. But if you think about things like how you influence other members of your family, how you influence the people around you that are important to you, and then you start to think about how you influence yourself, I think if people can work on influencing themselves, understanding what makes them tick, which is everything from self-care to motivation to guilt to all these things we've been speaking about, I hope that will encourage them both to be more gentle with themselves and worry that little bit less, but also to really realize that this game of life that we all play is something where we get to make up the rules to a greater extent than many of us realize. And so every time people face a situation where they're like, there's something that they're finding difficult about growing their coaching business, I think they can ask themselves, do I genuinely need to get better at this? Or do I genuinely need to leap into the unknown and take a risk and try it? Or do I need to do something different? Do I need to do something different because it doesn't align with who I am? And so it probably won't align with everybody. So I'll probably get some clients that way or build a community. But people have those choices in what they do that they don't need to blindly follow because somebody says, if you do this course, you'll get 6 figures. They get to make the rules of the game up while learning from others, but they get to decide. That's the biggest takeaway I'd like to give.
Yeah, they get to decide, and they get to decide who they are being as they turn up. Alex, thank you. It was a joy. It was wonderful to hear about your own journey and experiences and how much they influence you and therefore influence others in the work that you do. I know our listeners will want to know more about you. So how can they find out about you, your programs, what you offer?
So the best way to find me at the moment is on LinkedIn because I'm redeveloping my website. If your listeners say that they heard me on the show, I'd be happy to link to them. I write quite a lot of things on LinkedIn and they can see all the different things that I'm connected to on there. So that would be the best way. They can just reach out, make personal contact with me, and I'll be very happy to say hello to them.
Fantastic. Thank you, listeners, for listening in. I'm sure that you found Alex as joyful and interesting and knowledgeable as I have. If you've liked the podcast, please share it with other people who might gain some experience and knowledge from this. If you want us to talk about different things, provide us with feedback. We always love listening to what you would like to hear us talk about too. And thank you for being here. It's really important to us. We appreciate your time. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. You can find out more about us on our website, www.empower-world.com, and on our social media networks, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Be empowered.